There are stories in country music, and then there are legends. Some legends, though, leave behind more questions than answers. For over 70 years, a ghost has haunted the highways of America. A ghost in a powder blue Cadillac, whose final hours are wrapped in a mystery that just won't die. He was the hillbilly Shakespeare, a man whose voice carried the weight of every broken heart in the country. Then, on New Year's Day 1953, Hank Williams was gone, found lifeless in the back seat of his car at just 29 years old. The official story was written quickly, a tragic, but simple, case of heart failure. But for the people who knew him, the artists who followed him, and the fans who wore out his records, it never felt that simple. The story of Hank's death has always felt like a book with the last chapter ripped out, full of shadowed figures and a silence that has echoed for decades, but now, a voice from the heart of that history is reflecting on the silence. A man who built his career on the very foundation Hank Williams laid. At 87 years old, Whisperin' Bill Anderson, one of Nashville's most respected legends, is looking back on his idol. Anderson isn't just sharing memories of a hero, he's giving voice to the deep sense of unease that has surrounded Hank's last ride for a lifetime. He's looking back at the music, the man, and the myth. In doing so, he forces us all to confront the unsettling details and the enduring theories that refuse to fade away. This isn't just another look at a cold case. This is a journey into the heart of a tragedy, guided by one of the last living legends who felt the world shift the day Hank Williams died. To get the weight of Hank Williams's death, you first have to understand the size of his life, especially through the eyes of a kid who wanted to be just like him. In the small towns of the American South in the late 40s and early 50s, the radio was a lifeline. And for a young Bill Anderson growing up in Georgia, one voice cut through the static with an honesty that was almost scary. It was the voice of Hank Williams, live from the Grand Ole Opry. Bill Anderson has always pointed to Hank Williams as his single greatest influence, his North Star. In interviews, Anderson has said Hank's music had a kind of magic. It wasn't just the clever rhymes or the catchy tunes. It was the pain. Anderson said you could hear a hurt that you couldn't ignore. That raw, unfiltered emotion was a revelation. Other artists sang songs, Hank Williams bled on his records. He sang about a lonesomeness so deep it felt like a physical presence, a coldness of the heart so bitter it could chill you to the bone. For an aspiring writer like Anderson, that was country music. It was truth, with no varnish. Long before he was Whisperin' Bill, Anderson was a student of Hank's aching, bluesy delivery. He soaked up the phrasing, the cadence, the way a simple line could hold an ocean of meaning. Williams wasn't just a singer, he was a storyteller. For the common man, a poet for people whose struggles rarely got a soundtrack. Songs like, "I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry," weren't just hits, they were hymns for the heartbroken. Anderson remembers how Hank's Opry shows were appointment listening. He, like millions of others, would gather around the radio, mesmerized. Hank could make you feel like he was singing directly to you, sharing a secret sorrow only the two of you understood. That connection is the bedrock of his legend. It's why, when Anderson started his own career, he carried that one core lesson: a song has to be honest. It has to feel real. Hank taught him that the saddest songs were often the most beautiful, because they were the most true. For Bill Anderson, Hank wasn't just a star. He was the master. And the sudden, baffling loss of the master would leave a scar that never quite healed. January 1, 1953. For most of America, it was a day for new beginnings. But in Nashville, a cold, dark silence was falling. The news started as a rumor, then became a shocking, unbelievable headline: Hank Williams was dead at 29. Bill Anderson was just 15 at the time, still dreaming of standing on that same Opry stage. He remembers the news as a seismic shock. In his reflections, Anderson has described the feeling that swept the nation. It felt like the heart of country music had stopped beating. He talks about a collective grief that you could feel everywhere. The man who had given voice to the country's sorrow was now the cause of its deepest mourning. For Nashville's music community, it was devastating. Legends like Roy Acuff and Ernest Tubb gathered to sing "I Saw the Light" at his funeral, a song Hank himself had made famous, now a desperate prayer in the face of an unthinkable loss. Thousands of fans poured into Montgomery, Alabama, to pay their respects, turning his funeral into a massive public spectacle of grief. They weren't just mourning a singer. They were mourning their voice, the man who understood them when nobody else seemed to. For a young Bill Anderson, it was a brutal lesson in how fragile life is, even for someone who seemed larger than life. The hero he only knew through the radio was suddenly, tragically mortal. He'd never met Hank, never seen him live, but the loss felt incredibly personal. It's a theme that would show up in Anderson's own songs for decades: the suddenness of goodbye, the ache of things left unsaid. The death of Hank Williams wasn't just the end of a career, it was the birth of a myth. And that myth was born in the confusion of that cold New Year's Day. The abruptness of it all left a vacuum, and into that vacuum rushed questions, whispers, and a deep-seated feeling that something was terribly wrong. The pain Anderson described was real, but it was compounded by the mystery. It wasn't just that Hank was gone, it was how he was gone that would start haunting country music lore for the next 70 years. The official account of Hank Williams's last hours is a bleak road trip, a desperate dash to a gig he would never play. On paper, it's a tragic but straightforward story of a man whose failing health finally gave out on a cold highway. The trip started in Montgomery, Alabama. Hank had two big comeback shows scheduled: New Year's Eve in Charleston, West Virginia, and New Year's Day in Canton, Ohio. His career was on the line. After being fired from the Grand Ole Opry for his drinking and unreliability, these shows were his chance to prove he was still the king, but his health was a wreck. He suffered from agonizing back pain caused by spina bifida occulta, a condition he'd had since birth. This led to a dangerous dependence on painkillers like morphine, and the sedative chloral hydrate to help him sleep. Combined with his heavy drinking, it was a lethal cocktail. An ice storm grounded his flight out of Knoxville, Tennessee, making the Charleston show impossible. Determined to get to Canton, Hank hired a 17-year-old college student, Charles Carr, to drive him over 500 miles through the winter storm in his new baby blue Cadillac. On December 31st, they checked into the Andrew Johnson Hotel in Knoxville. Hank was in bad shape. A local doctor, P.H. Cardwell, was called to the room and gave him 2 injections, reportedly a mix of vitamin B12 and morphine. According to Carr, hotel porters had to carry the now semi-conscious Williams to the Cadillac around 10:45 p.m. as they set off into the night. Carr later said the last time he spoke to Hank was when they stopped in Bristol, Virginia. He asked Hank if he wanted to eat, and Hank said no. Those are believed to be his last words. Hours later, in the early morning of January 1, 1953, Carr grew concerned by the silence from the back seat. He pulled into a gas station in Oak Hill, West Virginia. When he reached back to pull the blanket over Hank, he felt an arm that was cold and stiff. He sped to a nearby hospital, where doctors pronounced Hank Williams dead. An autopsy was performed, and the cause of death was officially listed as insufficiency of the right ventricle of the heart, basically, heart failure. The report noted hemorrhages in the heart and neck, and the case was closed. A tragic story of a man whose body, ravaged by pain and addiction, simply gave out. On the surface, it's a sad, simple conclusion. But if you look just a little closer, the story starts to fall apart. The most persistent theory about Hank's death rips the official timeline to shreds. It suggests Hank Williams never made it out of Tennessee alive. This is the Knoxville theory, and it argues that the hillbilly Shakespeare died not on a West Virginia highway, but in his room at the Andrew Johnson Hotel. This alternate story has been pieced together from witness accounts and nagging inconsistencies. The theory starts with Hank's condition in Knoxville. He wasn't just tired. He was severely intoxicated and in distress before he was given 2 shots of morphine by Dr. Cardwell. This is where the stories diverge. The official version has Hank leaving the hotel with help. But the Knoxville theory points to rumored statements from the hotel staff that night. Local lore suggests the men who carried Williams to the Cadillac believed he was already dead. If true, it means 17-year-old Charles Carr was unknowingly driving a hearse. This theory often points to an unconfirmed account involving a patrolman named Swan Kitts, who reportedly pulled Carr over for a traffic violation outside Knoxville. In later retellings of the story, Kitts claimed he looked in the back seat and told Carr his passenger looked dead, with Carr insisting he was just sleeping. If this controversial account is true, it would place Hank's time of death hours before the official discovery. Then there's the medical evidence. The state of Hank's body in Oak Hill is a major point of contention. Some reports indicated that rigor mortis, the stiffening of the body, had already begun. While the timing of rigor mortis can vary depending on conditions, some have argued that for it to be present, Hank would have needed to be dead for several hours, pushing his time of death back to when he was still in or near Knoxville. The logic of the trip has also been questioned. Why would a 17-year-old, in an ice storm, check out of a warm hotel late at night with a passenger who was clearly unconscious? The Knoxville theory suggests a grim possibility, that after Hank died, a panicked decision was made to move his body to create the illusion he died on the road, maybe to avoid a scandal. It paints a picture not of a quiet death, but of a frantic, clandestine operation to move a dead man across state lines. To really grapple with the mystery, you have to look at the few people with Hank at the very end. Their actions and their stories are the keys. Three figures stand out: the teenage driver, the local doctor, and the fraudulent doctor, who cast a shadow over Hank's final year. First, there's Charles Carr. Just 17, a college kid hired to be a chauffeur. He was the only person with Hank for that entire final trip, making him the only witness. For years, Carr was reluctant to talk about it, and who could blame him? He went from being an anonymous teenager to a key figure in one of music's most famous deaths. When he did speak, his accounts were sometimes inconsistent about where and when he realized Hank was dead. Few have ever seriously implicated Carr in any wrongdoing, but his story remains the fragile, and at times contradictory, thread holding the official narrative together. Next is Dr. P.H. Cardwell, the Knoxville physician who gave Hank the injections. He was a legitimate doctor called to treat a sick patient. He administered morphine to calm Hank's violent hiccups and ease his pain. While the autopsy didn't mention drugs, toxicology in the 1950s was very limited. It's likely the tests simply couldn't detect the morphine. Dr. Cardwell was acting on the symptoms he saw, but in giving Hank morphine, he added another powerful depressant to the toxic mix of chloral hydrate and alcohol already in Hank's system, a combination that medical experts agree could be lethal. Finally, and most disturbingly, there's the ghost in this machine, a man calling himself Dr. Toby Marshall. Marshall was a con man and convicted forger who had bought fake medical diplomas. In Hank's last year, he had fallen under Marshall's care. Marshall's primary treatment was prescribing the highly addictive sedative, chloral hydrate. His involvement paints a grim picture of exploitation, a predator attached to a vulnerable superstar. Whether he was physically present at the end or not, Toby Marshall's malpractice represents the dark side of an industry that was profiting from Hank, even as it was killing him, and this is where we come back to Bill Anderson. At 87, his reflections aren't about solving a 70-year-old case. He's our emotional guide, a living link to the era when this all went down. He helps us grapple with the legacy of his hero, a legacy defined as much by its tragic mystery as its musical genius. When Bill Anderson talks about Hank Williams, it's with the reverence of a lifelong student. He has admitted Hank's influence is woven into the fabric of his own career. In a 2023 Q&A on his website, Anderson was asked about movies based on the lives of friends like Hank. His response was telling. He quoted Hank's steel guitar player, Don Helms, who said of the first Hank Williams biopic, "It's all right if you like fiction." That says it all. It reveals a deep frustration within that generation of artists, a feeling that the real story, the one they lived, has been consistently buried under Hollywood drama. Anderson's perspective is that of a purist. He recognizes that the conspiracy theories are, in part, a search for a truth that feels as raw as one of Hank's songs. The official cause of death, heart failure, feels too clinical, too neat to capture the violent storm of a life that burned so bright and so fast. His reflections remind us that for the country music community, Hank's death left a wound that never fully healed, partly because the circumstances remained so murky. It's the not knowing that haunts people. Anderson's willingness to speak on it validates the public's long-held suspicion that there's more to the story. He's not claiming to have a secret answer, but he is confirming that the unease is real and has been felt at the highest levels of country music for decades. He gives voice to the idea that Hank was a sensitive soul exploited by those around him, caught in a machine that took everything until there was nothing left. Over 70 years later, the death of Hank Williams remains a puzzle with too many missing pieces. The official report closed the file, but it didn't quiet the questions. These are the doubts that have kept the mystery alive, passed down through generation, and reflected upon by elders like Bill Anderson. First and foremost, where and when did Hank Williams actually die? Was it in the Cadillac near Oak Hill, as the official story claims? Or was it hours earlier in that hotel in Knoxville? The conflicting accounts leave this fundamental question completely unresolved. Second, what was the exact role of the injections he received? Dr. Cardwell administered morphine to a man who had already consumed alcohol and chloral hydrate. Modern medicine tells us this combination is incredibly dangerous. Was it a tragic medical misjudgment or something else? Third, the people around Hank remain figures of scrutiny. Charles Carr, the teenage driver, was the only witness for the whole trip, but was he just a scared kid, or was he told to stick to a story? And what about Dr. Toby Marshall, the quack who supplied Hank with dangerous drugs? How much responsibility does he bear for setting the stage for Hank's death? Finally, why was the investigation so superficial? The autopsy was criticized for its lack of thoroughness, and no comprehensive toxicology report was completed, likely due to the limits of 1953 technology. Still, a famous man found dead in a car, driven by a teenager, after getting injections from one doctor and prescriptions from a known fraud. Today, this would trigger a massive investigation. In 1953, it was quietly filed away. Was that just the standard of the time, or a deliberate effort to avoid a scandal? These questions have no easy answers. They are the lingering chords of a song that never found its resolution. The official story says one thing, but the evidence, the rumors, and the reflections of legends like Bill Anderson suggest something far more complicated. What do you believe really happened to Hank Williams? Do you trust the official account, or do you think there's truth to the Knoxville theory? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more deep dives into country music's greatest icons, make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell. Hank Williams left behind two legacies. There's the music, timeless, heartbreaking, and the foundation of modern country music. His songs of love, loss, and faith are just as powerful today. He is and always will be the hillbilly Shakespeare, a man who could distill a universe of pain into a 3-minute record, but his other legacy is darker and more complex. It's the mystery of his end. The story of Hank Williams doesn't have a final, peaceful note. It ends with a question mark. It's the story of a man whose immense talent was matched only by his profound suffering, from his chronic back pain to the addictions that chased him to his grave. He was surrounded by a world that wanted a piece of him, and in the end, it seems to have consumed him entirely. Bill Anderson, reflecting on his idol at 87, isn't trying to rewrite